Good afternoon, everyone. This is Diana Arias with the Community Technical Assistance Center at NYU's McSilver Institute, and I would like to welcome you to Trauma Responsive and Affirming Practices to Reduce Suicide Among Trans and Gender Expansive Youth with Dr. Ashley Austin. Dr. Austin is a professor of social work and distinguished professor for the Center for Human Rights and Social Justice in Barry University's School of Social Work. She is actively involved in conducting research and devoted to promoting the health and well-being of trans and gender diverse children, teens, and adolescents, as well as adults. In addition, Dr. Austin is engaged in direct clinical practice, as well as training in clinical consultation aimed at advancing affirmative care for trans and gender diverse populations. As a trauma-informed researcher and practitioner, Dr. Austin is committing to research aimed at advancing LGBTQ plus affirmative practice. She co-developed Affirm and Affirm Caregiver, evidence-based interventions aimed at improving the mental health of well-being of LGBTQ plus clients. Before I turn it over to Dr. Austin, I do want to remind folks that we are offering CEs for this presentation. So on this slide, you will see that in order to be eligible, you must be a licensed social worker, a licensed mental health counselor, a licensed marriage and family therapist, or a licensed psychoanalyst. And you must be in attendance for at least 75% of the webinar. You must also be using your own unique Zoom-generated link, so there's no sharing of links. And lastly, using a computer as attending this webinar via cell phone is not acceptable for CE purposes. Those eligible for CEs will receive a detailed email within the next 1 to 3 business days. Before we get started, I do want to also highlight that we have a poll question. So if you can go ahead and respond to this question, how confident are you in supporting trans and gender expansive youth in your work? If you can please select your response, the one that best describes for you, that would be great. Just very quickly, we have, a good number of you, about 42% of the individuals that participated feel fairly confident in supporting trans and gender expansive youth in your work. So great, thank you so much. Followed by somewhat confident. So at the very least, we certainly hope that you walk away with some tangible practices that you can begin to implement or to strengthen your capacity in working with this population. So with that, thank you again for joining us for today's webinar. Thank you for your participation in the poll question and the chat box. I am now going to turn it over to Dr. Austin to get us started.
Super. Thank you so much, Diana. Appreciate that. Welcome, everybody. Very exciting to see such a big group of folks interested in talking about how to support trans and gender expansive youth. Here's a just quick overview of our agenda. Some of the things I'm hoping to work with you all on today is just sort of learning more about the health among trans and gender expansive youth, looking at some of the factors that promote it versus don't promote it, and then looking at how we can do some of this work in our therapeutic practice. So I'm going to be first introducing you to the kind of the language I'm going to be using. So you'll hear me probably go back and forth between trans and gender expansive and some other terms, but what I'm doing here is sometimes I use the word trans and non-binary, maybe trans and gender diverse. Sometimes you'll just hear me say trans, but really what I'm wanting to refer to are sort of the umbrella of trans and gender expansive young people who have a host of binary and non-binary identities. And so I think probably, I'm not sure if you're all from the, similar or different regions, but lots of times folks are using terms that are regionally different, and we want to sort of use the terms that are most comfortable for any given client. I think that all the terms I use, at least at this point in time, continue to be sort of appropriate and affirming, but language does change. So just keeping that in mind and wanting you all to use the terms that are most comfortable for your clients. All right, so what we're going to do is really focus a bit on some of the why, like why are we here? What is important? What are the concerns? And a lot of those concerns revolve around the really concerning mental health disparities that we see in trans and gender diverse adults and young people. And then, of course, importantly, as practitioners, and I see a range of you with different sort of sort of roles and responsibilities within the field is the idea of looking at how we can continue to support young people, how we can mitigate these risks, how we can engage in practices that really help our young people feel better, even in the face of these risks. So we'll talk about some of the key factors associated with mental health. And to do so, we're going to sort of lean in some ways to some of the more alarming statistics. These are important to recognize. I think these are probably not new to many of us. I saw in the poll that a lot of folks had maybe some experience with this, sort of moderate to extensive experience. But what we have known for a while is that trans and gender expansive young people um, are at rate, high risk for suicidality, both sort of ideation, attempts, and unfortunately completions, right? And that these risks for suicide come along with other risks for depression and anxiety. This data is just from a recent Trevor Project study, but I think we've seen this kind of data for quite some time. And a lot of times what we'll notice is the risks are even exacerbated more for trans and gender diverse folks with other intersecting identities, other identities that are marginalized in our societies. And as you can see at the bottom of the slide, that there are some other concerns that that we see sort of other risks, and those are actually risks that can exacerbate suicidality. And we'll get into that quite a bit as the day goes on. I guess the 90 minutes goes on. So to understand trans-specific risk factors, you must, and I'll sort of say you must, understand gender minority stress. And so what is gender minority stress? What do we mean by this? What do I mean when I say this? And what I'll say is minority stress is a model developed originally by Elon Meyer, psychologist, in the 90s, and then published in 2003, like his seminal article. And that article really sort of talked about this conceptual model for understanding health disparities among LGBT folks, well, really LGBT folks. And this model was later expanded by Hendricks and Testa in like 2012 to apply to trans folks as well. But what this model says, it really says that minority stressors are the reason that we see exacerbated rates of poor mental health outcomes among LGBTQ and trans and gender expansive clients. That we see these big health disparities, even including things like substance abuse and all the things, right? Behavioral and mental health disparities. These are really related to minority stressors. So what are minority stressors? These are pervasive identity-based stigma, depression, discrimination, marginalization, microaggressions. These are the kinds of things that LGBT and trans and gender diverse folks experience on a daily basis in contemporary society. And these experiences are what really lead to these exacerbated rates of mental health concerns that often land folks in our offices. I'm going to talk about this model a lot, and I'm also going to add to this model by tuning in to some of the specific current concerns that are related to gender dysphoria and gender euphoria, and how that plays in. Minority stress model, though it was sort of developed in the early 2000s, it's been studied nonstop since that time in tons and tons of empirical studies. And really what we find is, yeah, it holds. It's not just a model like that might work. It really does work, right? It really does apply. It really does make sense of what's happening, right? So lots and lots of data saying, yep, this is indeed why trans and gender diverse folks are experiencing these things. And so that's a lot of what I'm going to be talking about today, is sort of thinking about these minority stressors as they apply to the work that we do, as they apply to the health risks that we see and are often charged to treat. And the way my lens, and hopefully many of your lens, is really to do this through affirmative practice, trans affirmative frameworks. And to be affirmative, in my humble opinion, we must understand minority stress. We can only be so affirmative if we actually don't really understand what's happening in the lives of trans and gender diverse folks, right? And so that is a really important part of affirmative practice as we operationalize it, as we bring it to life, not just as a idea, but something we actually do on a regular basis. So that's what I'll be chatting with you about today. So gender minority stress what do I mean by this? Like I talked about sort of these pervasive identity stress, stigmas and stressors and those kinds of things. Examples, what this looks like in daily life include things like being misgendered, even unintentionally, right? Even unintentionally, and certainly intentionally. Invalidation of trans and gender expansive identities, experiences, the lives of trans people, when those are invalidated, erased, or invisibilized, that is a gender minority stressor. Barriers to affirmation, anything that gets in the way of me being able to be affirmed as a trans person. I'm a cis person. I don't know if that was in my slide. I just want to make that clear. But as I'm sort of thinking about folks, right? Anybody who is trans, they're saying anything that gets in the way of my ability to affirm myself is an example of gender minority stress. The perpetuation of negative stereotypes, myths, misperceptions, physical, sexual, and verbal abuse that's rooted in transphobia, and even in cisgenderism, right? Like even in cisgender bias or cis normativity, those factors contribute to this minority stress that shows up in so many places and relationships and experiences. Minority stress leads to the internalization of stigma and shame. That's part of this model, this idea that not only am I getting it from the outside, but as a human, we know, right? As we get these onslaught of messages, we tend to internalize them. And then I'm filled with sort of this, my own meaning making around this is that I am to blame. I should be filled with shame. And these experiences can and do exacerbate gender dysphoria, which I'll talk about quite a bit later. But gender dysphoria is really a key component of stress and distress for many, many trans people and many trans young people. So let me move my slide. So the gender minority stress model, really this just sort of gives us a sense of what this looks like, right? I'm a trans or gender expansive kiddo or adult, right? But I've lived in this world that is sort of rooted in sociocultural, political, familial, religious contexts that are rooted in transphobia and cisnormativity. And I know this. And as I'm navigating my own identity, I am beginning to try to understand it, sort of what my own needs and experiences are, but I'm also sort of getting all this other information that's telling me I don't belong, I don't exist. So I begin to experience tons of identity-based stigma and oppression and discrimination and invisibilization while I'm trying to navigate life. This leads to what right? Not a shocker that it leads to things like anxiety, depression, social anxiety, maybe even trauma symptoms, suicidality. And I'll explain a bit more of sort of what this sounds and looks like. And to do that, I want to introduce another theory that I think is important to think about today as we're thinking about one of the key outcomes that are sort of big concerns to all of us, I believe, would be this idea of suicidality, particularly among young people, right? Sort of really scary for any of us to really think about. And so to understand suicide among LGBT and particularly trans young people, we want to think about it through at least my recommendation is that we think about it through the interpersonal theory of suicide, put forth by Joyner originally and then sort of built upon by Van Orden. And then I've written about it, as has another trans researcher, Doug Ellie, looked at trans issues through this lens. But what it says really is that suicidality is driven by two psychological states. One is the state of thwarted belongingness, feeling this lack of belonging, lack of connection occurs when somebody feels socially isolated or rejected by family, friends, and broader communities. For trans youth, this often results when we hear young people getting family rejection, bullying, exclusion from peer groups or sports teams or social events, school environments, being on the outside, not feeling included, not seeing myself included anywhere, erasure or disconnection within political, cultural, religious, social contexts. So this idea of like looking for myself in the world and not seeing a place where I belong, where people want me, where people, I can connect to people like me. And then we have perceived burdensomeness, This feeling of what is a burden? It means feeling like a disappointment, feeling like I'm not worthy, that my existence causes a burden or a hardship for my friends, my family, my loved ones, my grandparents, my community, even my culture sometimes, right? We hear this a lot, right? Trans and gender expansive youth may develop these beliefs, not surprisingly, right? From the negative messages they're getting from society and then often parroted by family or peers. Your identity is just a phase, it's wrong, it's a sin, you're just confused, you just want attention. Interpersonal microaggressions, such as dismissive or invalidating comments, really reinforce this feeling of not being wanted. We often talk about when I do various trainings or talk to folks when parents say, hey, listen, just don't tell your grandparent about who you are because they will not survive it. Like they won't make it if they know. It'll kill them. Well, if that doesn't make me feel like a burden, what will? And probably many of us have heard comments like this being said to trans folks, trans young people. Maybe if you are trans or gender diverse, you remember having comments like this being told to you and sort of the heavy load that that placed upon you. So really understanding the high rates of suicidality when we're thinking about it through this idea of feeling like I don't belong and feeling like I'm a burden. And then looking at where does this come from, right? And the other piece of this theory that's really important is to think about it when we have sort of prolonged experiences of feeling like I don't belong, and they're not just in one place, it's not just in my family or it's not just in my school, right? Lots of times young people have a soft place to land. School's tough, but I've got my family. School's tough, but I've got my religion. What we are seeing with a lot of our trans and gender expansive young people is that they're getting this hit from all sides. They're getting sort of this minority stress and this rejection from many places. And it starts to seem all encompassing and maybe forever. And it starts to be seen at the micro, my family level, my school level, and maybe even, right, my laws, my states, my country, those kinds of things. And so folks start to feel like, I don't know if I can live authentically. Is there a place for me in this world? And if there is, can I be myself? And this feeling of being trapped, having no way out, really does increase the likelihood of suicidality. So the good news is, as we think about some of these really awful things, we also start to get a sense of um, some of the protective factors, right? This sense of the risks are this lack of sense of belonging, burdensomeness shows up. And this was a study I published in 2020, and then a couple other studies a couple of years later, looking at some of the factors that really impact young people's suicidality, microaggressions, interpersonal and environmental, family rejection, negative school environments, harassment, victimization, invisibility, lack of connection and belonging, anti-trans legislation, barriers to getting affirmation, right? We've been hearing a lot about this. When I can't get access to affirm myself, my identity, my core basic human needs, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? When I can't get my basic level needs met, I start to feel these risks. Good news is we do know that there are many protective factors, and I'm going to talk about these and many more when we think about how we can help. Family support. There are many affirming families, right? Luckily, more and more, I come in contact with lots of parents who are their children's biggest allies. And the more we can help parents become their kids' allies and their kids' sources of support, the better off they are. Peer support, community support, online and offline, helping our young people cultivate communities in different spaces. School belonging, when um, when folks are in schools that are really help them feel like they belong, where they see themselves, when they can have conversations about themselves, when they have friendships and are really connected. It's really helpful. Affirming care and experiences, hope for the future in which they can live authentically. And then gender euphoria, this idea of how do we help our clients begin to foster experiences of euphoria. Sometimes they happen organically, which is phenomenal, and sometimes they don't, and we can help foster those. Okay, we'll talk about that. So when we talk about this idea of thinking about gender minority stress and how this contributes, we want to look at a couple things, right? When we look at the one study I did, it looked at high rates of suicidality. And one was like sort of past 6 month ideation, and the other indicator was lifetime suicide attempts. And we see these really high rates up there, right? 56% and 86%. And our study, what it found was interpersonal microaggressions really did predict these suicide attempts, and lack of a school belonging increased risk for suicide attempts and suicidality, right? Because not shocking, right? Kids spend a lot of their time. That is their job, is to go to school and be in these spaces. And they often don't have control over where they get to go to school and how often they go, right? They're kind of mandated. So when they don't feel like they belong, the suicidality goes up. When they do feel like they belong, their suicidality goes down. And then this idea of emotional neglect and by family. When our family neglects our needs, it increases the risk of suicidality. And a lot of times, what that can look like is not attending to who I am as a human. I am a trans person. I am non binary. I'm gender expansive. When this is ignored, neglected, rejected by family, we really start to see our young people feel really, really alone and really hopeless. Other factors beyond interpersonal start to, whoops, going too fast for myself, is this social context. And what we are seeing is like sort of here's my school, and then I look beyond my school. And as we think about young people, they are on their phones 24/7, right? And as we think about young people, they are impacted gravely by lots of anti-trans laws. And a lot of these laws were doing things like preventing them from being able to sort of be seen and be connected to in schools, but also receive some of the gender affirming care that is really life-saving. I have done this work for many, many, many years with both youth and adults. And I think this is a webinar about adults, about youth, but many of these things apply to adults. So if you work primarily with adults, much of this content is interchangeable. But we are focused on young people today. And so as young people are thinking about these laws, and a lot of the laws have impacted their ability to access affirming care in a way that some adults have been a little bit luckier to escape, at least in the past. And so some of the data, the new data by Lee and colleagues, is telling us that in 1 year of enactment of anti-trans laws, they were seeing attempts in suicide going up among trans and gender expansive 13 to 17-year-olds in really high rates, in 7 to 72% across different places. And that these increase in anti-LGBT legislation increases stress and really helps families feel like they, sort of makes families feel like they need to escape to another place, another state. And sometimes there is no safe state for them, or maybe no place that they can access, or they feel really trapped by other things. So really the point is restrictive policies signal societal rejection, really reinforcing feelings of hopelessness and a lack of belonging, not just in this one little school, but in my broader community, in my broader state, in my broader country. And it really exacerbates this minority stress and really perpetuates this feeling of, I don't belong, I don't see hope for belonging, and suicide feels like a way out, right? That's what this interpersonal theory of suicide tells us, right? We see it in many of our clients, they speak this truth to us. The other thing I really want to talk about, and doesn't often get brought up in work focused on trans and gender diverse folks, although it should, is really taking a little bit of a deeper look at gender dysphoria and what do we mean by that? And how does an anti-trans context or anti-trans family, community, school really intersect with gender dysphoria to make things harder for me as a young person? So, gender dysphoria refers broadly to the distress that may accompany the incongruence between one's experienced or expressed gender and one's assigned gender. Whether those experiences are binary or non binary, the distress is what we're really thinking about. This is a fine introduction to the concept of gender dysphoria. Um, But the DSM-5 and any of our sort of DSM-based diagnostic-based definitions don't really do justice to what it feels like to live with gender dysphoria on a daily basis, to be navigating childhood and adolescence and young adulthood, or and certainly all phases of life when experiencing gender dysphoria. So clinicians really do need to go beyond the diagnosis and into the experience of dysphoria to understand its impact on their clients. I'll try to just give a little nod to this. I've done a range of studies, qualitative studies looking at, and some quant, looking at the experiences of gender dysphoria among trans young adults. And I've read and consumed some other beautiful research about gender dysphoria from this very lived experience perspective by a researcher. I think they're in my reference section, Pasgalupo and colleagues, but they're fantastic. But complex constellation of dysphoric experiences that may vary across individuals. So it's not a one size fits all. So making sure that you are tuning into each client individually. It does vary over time, circumstance, and parts of the self and body. So really tuning into what's being impacted for your client. And circumstance. Circumstance is really important. Circumstances outside of a client can exacerbate gender dysphoria. It is not limited to, nor even necessarily centered around primary sex characteristics. So people got really caught up in that. And that's often not what's going on for any given client, youth or adult. Sometimes it is, but it's really just part of a bigger picture. It's everything from voice to hair, to facial hair, to body presentation, to my arm hair, to the size of my hands or my feet, to the way someone is perceiving me, to my height, to the size of my head, to the clothes I want to wear, to the way I'm being experienced or treated. And really important that folks understand and really do their due diligence to understand gender dysphoria and gender affirmation if they want and plan to work affirmatively with trans and gender diverse young people. It is really painful. That is a lot of what both my clinical practice, I work exclusively, well, 99% of my private clients that I do in my private practice each week are trans folks. And most of my research has really centered these experiences. Very painful dissonance between uh, my dissonance of myself, who I know myself to be, who I know myself to be in my mind's eye, and how the world is seeing me and treating me. When those two things are not aligned, it is excruciating. It can feel like suffering and visceral pain. It can feel like being trapped and really disconnected both from myself and from the world around me. And that is a really lonely and often traumatizing experience. So I want to reinforce again, gender dysphoria, which is a highly internal experience, is exacerbated by negative and non-affirming external and contextual experiences. Gender dysphoria is linked to a host of co-occurring mental health conditions. So things like depression, anxiety, and PTSD and social anxiety. It can be experienced as traumatic, big T trauma traumatic, particularly when gender dysphoria is experienced within family, interpersonal, political, legal context in which relief is impossible or hopeless, or it feels and seems impossible or hopeless, right? And by relief, we know relief for trans and gender expansive people means living authentically, means affirmation. That is just the bottom line. That is what relief looks and sounds like. Gender dysphoria does not abate without gender affirmation. What do I mean by gender affirmation? I'll get into that. But it does not abate. It does not magically disappear. It is reduced and mitigated through affirmation. And that's part of what we need to be doing in our practice. So as we think about this, and I'm telling you that it can be experienced as traumatic, can and is, we want to really recognize the impact of these traumatic events and experiences on the lives of our trans and gender diverse clients. And so I think it's really important for us to think about, expanding, if we haven't already, our definition of trauma, making sure we understand it. I'll talk about that in a second. I think in my intro, it's always like a long intro when somebody's getting it, their bio read. But some of the things I'll sort of just reinforce here is that I do a lot of trauma works with my clients, and I do a lot of affirming work with my clients. And I have developed and co-developed, along with my colleague, Dr. Shelley Craig, an affirmative intervention for LGBT young people and adults called Affirm. I'll talk about it later, but it is rooted in this affirming stance, and it really applies this trauma-informed lens. I'm also a certified EMDR therapist and do lots of advanced trauma work with my individual clients, where we are really sort of looking at a range of big T trauma and understanding it through the lens of both trauma informed practice and affirmative practice, right? And so that means that we are not just thinking about the PTSD diagnosis to understand trauma, right? That trauma is not just life-threatening. It is sort of pervasive, sort of chronic forms of discrimination and prejudice that we know impact trauma responses among folks who are experiencing those. Lots of marginalized populations, not just the trans community. Trauma-informed care cannot and should not ever be separated from affirming practice. Those two things must be like little partners in life. And the work must focus on restoring client safety, power, and connection. This is true for all trauma work, and we really need this to be true for any work we're doing with trans clients. Help restore our clients' safety. Safety means something really specific when we think about affirming contexts and when we think about trauma contexts. Power over our thoughts, our feelings, our bodies, and our future. And this can be really hard when we're living in traumatizing environments. Helping our clients connect to affirmative sources of support and safety. And when we think about safety and support, we have to also think about affirmation, because there can be people with great intentions who are not affirmative, and the result doesn't feel safe to our clients. It's really important. So as we think about trans-specific sources of resilience and exploration, as this other part of being of healing, right? When we're doing this trauma responsive lens, we have to think about healing. What heals? Well, these are the things that heal. And one of them is gender affirmation, right? Gender affirming experiences. Trans and gender expansive youth and young adults experience improved mental health when they have access to and engage in gender affirming interventions. And those mean many things. Those might be social interventions, so access to social affirmation, hair, clothing, grooming, restrooms, locker rooms, name, pronouns, being seen, treated, and being able to live my life as who I am in these social ways. Medical affirming interventions, these often get sort of like all the news, but the truth is that for young people, they mean something really developmental. And they are not the only way of being affirmed, but when they are needed, they are really pivotal. And they might start with something like hormone blockers, right? And those are the parts that happen, folks are always talking about young children. Well, no, hormone blockers happen upon puberty, right? And then hormone therapy doesn't happen until much later. And surgery, something like top surgery, would happen later on. And these are really, really life affirming and life saving interventions that have lots of research behind how they help save the lives of trans and gender expansive teenagers. Other affirming practices are legal practices, name and gender changes on legal documents, IDs, school records, medical records, being able to be seen and recognized as who I am, make sure kids use the name that affirms me, that my name can't be used to tease or harm or torture or bully me by kids or adults. Really important. And then interpersonal affirmation is huge and often overlooked. A host of social interactions that really affirm and validate someone's internal sense of self. There are so many ways we can do this, and so many ways in which this is create really powerful healing moments for our clients. Unfortunately, as the barriers to accessing care increase for our young people, we might see increased feelings of hopelessness or suicidality or depression or anxiety. I am seeing this in my practice. Some of you might be seeing it. So it is really important that we show up and are prepared to do the affirming work in our interpersonal therapeutic space with our clients to ensure that they feel seen, heard, visible, and validated for exactly who they are when they are with us. Gender euphoria is something I started studying not too long ago, and it really comes from the trans community themselves. This word, this language, this experience, and my research, really for me, research and clinical practice go hand in hand. My research is really all about helping to inform good practice. I thought, well, it might be really important to bring some of this to the research to study it, so we could get it into the hands of providers and get it into the hands of decision makers. So we really looked at through the lens of trans people, what is gender euphoria? And one researcher talked about it as being, their participants talked about it as being moments of pure joy when you feel good about your body, how you feel in it, what you're wearing, and how you're perceived by others, right? So this affirmation brought euphoria. And in my research, what came up was it was this range of positive feelings. Not so often we'll hear euphoria and we think it's like just pure elation. It is, and it can be, but it's also things like comfort, confidence, certainty, satisfaction, and joy in response to some experience of gender affirmation. And with my clients and the participants that we studied, I see gender affirmation and gender affirming experience that lead to euphoria as being a range of things. Sometimes it is a post surgical, like glance at oneself in the mirror. Sometimes it's that. Other times it's hearing my name, my affirmed name, and it just puts a smile on my face. Sometimes it's having someone just get me, understand me. I don't need to explain it. Someone else sees me, is attuned with me, and I feel so seen and understood that I feel euphoric as my authentic self, right? So these are the kinds of things we're seeing, hearing, bearing witness to, right? Some of you who are trans yourselves have lived through this. I hope you've had experiences of euphoria. And what we find, both clinically and the research, is that when trans and gender expansive young people and adults can intentionally attend to, pay attention to positive thoughts and feelings associated with being affirmed, it can lead to this, right? So when I reflect on that, when I spend time really tuning in to the thoughts and feelings, I experiencing that euphoria. We can facilitate that, right? We in our practice can facilitate that. And the little diagram sort of helps us think about that, right? When a trans person is exposed to a gender affirming antecedent, right? This is from my study, but it's this idea of when something gender affirming happens. And I spend time talking and thinking about it as a trans person or trans young person. And I'm like, man, that felt good. Ah, loved that. Oh, I feel like me. Oh, that felt so good. Like, okay, that's who I am. Whether it's me in the mirror, whether it's a trans young person in a selfie, whether it's a trans person responding to something amazing, an outfit, a conversation, a relationship, this affirming self-talk that really, right, fires up all our neurons. We really, and then noticing it. Oh, I notice what it feels like. That feels like joy. I'm tuning into my emotions. I'm feeling, a flutter. I'm feeling an expansion. I'm feeling my shoulders, sort of my back straighter, my shoulders amp up. I am feeling this. I feel bigger. I feel less small. I feel stronger, better, more beautiful, more confident, more whatever, right? And we're helping them notice these emotions and thoughts and sensations. And that really leads to this experience of euphoria, as folks have described it and shared it. And hopefully we'll get to experience in all of our practice. Part of being able to bring this into practice is tuning into sources of trans joy. Do we all know what sources of trans joy are? Do you have trans people in your life that you love, that you're connected to, that you get to experience trans joy along with them? I am lucky to be able to do so. I don't know if you all are. If you're not, spend some time sort of teaching yourselves, learning what is trans joy, gender affirming clothing. Maybe it's music. Maybe it's queer trans role models, drag shows. Maybe it's wearing a binder for the very first time, helping someone pick out a binder. Maybe it's queer and trans affirming spaces and games and places like Dungeons and Dragons and video games, living authentically, showing up authentically in a space, changing my name, using my name, picking my name, practicing, trying out my name. Online communities of support, being in queer and trans spaces, being in queer and trans spaces that also affirm other aspects of my identity, my Black identity, my religious identity, my Latinx identity, what my sober identity, right? What other identities and places where I get to be authentically fully me. And so as you are helping to sort of learn what that is like for each and every one of your clients, you are listening and you're attuning to that and you are bringing that into your work with them. You're helping them notice where they find joy and how to access that joy. Hope, belonging, and worthiness. We have been talking about a lot of the things that our clients are being told and exposed to that tell them they don't belong, they aren't worthy as they are, they need to go away, they need to disappear. And instead, in our spaces, we are going to mitigate that. We are going to focus on hope, belonging, and worthiness. We are going to help our clients see themselves the way we see them. We see them through our eyes, our affirming eyes, that their identities are worthy to be celebrated. They are not a burden, that their identities are part of a larger, beautiful, powerful, resilient community that where they have belonged and still belong, where they have lots of others. When youth tune into trans and gender expansive joy and gender euphoria, we will help them see these experiences as available to them, as having hope for a positive future. We will help them connect to these experiences. They will see these experiences. We will hold the hope for them if they're losing it. That, in my opinion, as a social worker, that is I'm an MSW and I have a PhD in social work. I am a social worker for more of my life than I haven't been. We hold the hope for our clients. When our young people cannot see this, we hold that hope. You belong, you will find joy, you deserve joy. And when we have affirming relationships, formal and informal, with us in a group, with others, helping them access that, they will feel like they belong and like they are worthy. Okay? This is our job to help cultivate that. So, as we think about this, I'm going to ask you to bridge a couple of your experiences, your trauma responsive practices and your affirming practices for your work with trans and gender expansive youth. And what I want to say by that is that we are going to tune into trauma and see it and help our clients recognize it in themselves and understand that it's okay, that they deserve to feel this, and that it is understandable that they feel this sometimes. Trauma means this: an event or a circumstance, a life circumstance. We could think of many that our clients are exposed to, that is experienced by the individual as something happens, I feel no control. It is excruciatingly negative. It exceeds my capacity to cope, and it results in lasting changes to my nervous system and my mind body, right? That's what trauma is. That's what it is for everybody, any person, all the time. If we are human, that is what trauma sounds and looks like, right? And when we are thinking about this, we are thinking about trauma through this lens of trans specific experiences and identity specific experiences. So gender dysphoria, gender minority stress, non-affirmation, barriers to affirmation. So when I'm experiencing my GD, my gender dysphoria within these contexts, relief seems impossible. I might feel panicked, stressed, overwhelmed, those kinds of things. And it might feel like trauma. What are the consequences of trauma? What does this look like? It looks like hypervigilance and fear. It looks like dissociation and numbing. It looks like internalized stigma and shame. And it looks like suicidality and self-harm. This is what trauma responses look like in all humans. And this is what we might see in our trans and gender expansive clients when they're experiencing traumatic situations. These are coping mechanisms, actually. They are survival mechanisms, right? This is how I cope with trauma. And they show up in our spaces as symptoms that we want to help our clients notice, tune into, and recognize. Are these helping you survive? Um, do you still need them? Do they still serve you? Or might you adopt other strategies that are more helpful? And so that's part of what we're doing, right? It's helping them notice these, and we're noticing them and recognizing, yeah, these make sense. I see these. I can understand these for my client. So our trauma responsive therapeutic practice with trans and gender expansive clients means a comprehensive approach that prioritizes safety, empowerment, and affirming care. And by safety, we mean both emotional and nervous system, and then affirmation, identity specific safety, right? It means integrating gender affirming practices with evidence based approaches like EMDR, like affirmative CBT, like trauma focused CBT, like DBT, other trauma practices, maybe somatic work, whatever you're doing in your practice. Trauma informed and trauma responsive practices, though, must be affirmative, or they will not feel like trauma responsive care. If we leave out the affirmation parts, we are not going to be doing the work with our clients. We are not going to be landing. We are going to be re traumatizing them unintentionally. So, as we think about applying trauma specific concepts to trans experiences, we want to think about the first piece, right? Safety. What does it mean to create safety from both a trauma specific and a gender affirming lens? Well, we think about cues of safety. That's standard trauma work, cues of safety in the space. Well, that means a lot of things. Maybe it means beautiful lighting and coziness and those kinds of things. Maybe it means a client being able to see the door. It also, for trans folks and LGBT folks, means flags, colors, images, mugs, stickers, language. How do I know you get me and that you are a safe place to talk about how the world is affecting me, how these sentiments are affecting me? How do I know I can trust you to understand what I'm going through? Use affirming names and pronouns consistently, right? And obviously, if there's an error, you need to attend to it, right? But you're really sort of being a place of affirmation. You're validating trans and gender expansive experiences, validating, honoring without questioning, minimizing, invalidating. Skepticism, questioning, any form of disbelief that will feel like trauma and re traumatization, right? Invalidation, invisibility will feel like trauma. We are actively addressing and challenging cisnormative biases within our therapeutic frameworks. Again, why minority stress is so important. Minority stress actively challenges cisnormative bias and raises our attention, the awareness that cisnormative bias hurts. It's not neutral, it hurts. When we use a minority stress informed framework, we are actively attending to and saying, I get it. The status quo is not okay. It is actively hurting you. We are ensuring confidentiality and protection from gender-related discrimination in clinical settings. We are understanding and validating trauma responses in clients that may be linked to experiences of dysphoria, rejection, and societal marginalization. We need to do our due diligence. We need to understand how these things feel to our clients, how they're experienced, so we don't have missed opportunities to attune, to connect, to validate, to support. We really need to acknowledge the cumulative impact of gender minority stress on mental health. We need to maintain a gender affirming and attuned therapeutic presence. Okay. We need to really be doing this over and over. We'll talk about sort of how this looks and how it shows up in practice. What I'm going to try to do is go through some of these strategies using a case example of one of my clients. I'll call her Chloe. She, her pronouns, 17-year-old Cuban American trans woman. She's almost 18. She came to me with a history of depression and suicidality and a lot of social anxiety. She initially sought therapy with me for gender dysphoria. She was seeking gender affirming care. She was seeking to mitigate her gender dysphoria. I've been seeing her for a while. I often see my clients for a long time. She came in off and on, ebb and flow, right? Their needs for me at 15. She has a tendency, right? Some of what she's gone through in her life, her identity based traumas, have led her to amplify the negatives about herself and really dismiss the positives. Okay. She has an explicitly affirming and supportive mother and a passively supportive father. So that was quite lucky. They were able to access a lot of things that she needed in a timely manner for her gender affirmation and got on board relatively quickly, especially mom. And dad was not a barrier, never was a barrier. She's experienced a lot of gender affirming experiences socially, legally, and eventually she was placed on HRT. All of those were things that were of really big importance to her. When she was younger, she had a lot of isolation in elementary and middle school. She felt very disconnected, experienced a lot of bullying in elementary and middle school. And then eventually in high school, she was able to move from a high school to one that was more of an art school that supported students with art specific skills. She has a musical talent. She is guitarist. And this school both affirmed her sort of musical identity and her trans identity. And it's been much more supportive to her. And she's finally sort of found a clique that gets her. She found people who are more like her in terms of interests and certainly openness toward queer and trans communities. She has an online girlfriend who has been amazing to her. Lives far away, but is a really huge source of support. She has a job at a local coffee shop, which is really big because she didn't want a job until she sort of presented as herself. And this has been really good. And then she plays in a band, which is a big source of resilience and support for her. Her suicidality has been gone for a while since she start experienced some affirmation, both from family and when she was affirmed in her body and her social relationships. I think that we really the suicidality really went away. Her depression and anxiety ebb and flow. They come back, and as I said, I see her off and on. They're usually related to social contextual things that are coming up they're sort of pulling on old wounds. And so she will be someone who comes into the various slides that I am talking to you all about. So the first piece is establishing safety in our sessions. The first thing to be able to do any good therapeutic work, any good trauma work, our clients have to be safe in their bodies and minds. They have to be safe in their sort of physical, neurological spaces, or we're doing nothing good clinically. So part of what I've really started to do is slow down with my clients, take time to check in to see that they are safe in their own sort of body, skin space. I do a lot of virtual work. You can do this in your own offices. I think back to oopsies I've made in the past where I think about a client I used to see them in my office who always came in dysregulated because of traffic and other things. And I kick myself for really not slowing down enough and really spending a bit more time with some of these strategies before we launched into the work. But can't change the past, so I do the good work now, right? But we really do slow down a lot now. Maybe that's breathing. Maybe it's slowing down our movements, stretching, sitting, doing our posture, or maybe it's like getting the wiggles out if somebody's really sort of not in that space. Sometimes it's water, tea, coffee. I'll be like, let go. Like for me, I'm a really big Topo Chico fan. And I'll be like, I always need that. And I'll tell my client, you need your drink, go get your whatever it is, a coffee or their water or a tea, an herbal tea, and they'll go get something like a smoothie, a boba, whatever's in. So they have that, right? I think that a lot of times it's comfort items. And so with Chloe, she really likes cozies, so a blanket or a hoodie. So sometimes she'll be like, wait, I want to go get my blanket. Or I'll say like, oh, get your blanket. And she'll go to her bed and get her blanket or put a hoodie on so she feels like protected and safe. Sometimes it's lighting if the room feels too light for them. Any of my clients, I'll sort of ask them, do you need to fix the light? Do you need to change your space? Is it cool? What do we need? Chloe likes definitely not bright light. She likes lower light. Chloe likes background music because she's a musician. So she'll have something in the background and it sets the vibe. And we've learned this over time. We've integrated it. So the things we've done in our sessions, we bring in. And then she has an emotional support dog, Winnie, who is fantabulous and can be pet and is not annoying and is not pesky, is just really soothing. Other clients of mine sometimes bring kitty cats in. So you can think about that. If you have your own emotional support animal in your space that you can use, that's always great. Affirming therapeutic presence. So there's our cues of safety, getting safe in our bodies. And then we are a conduit of safety or not so safety, right? So we need to be safe. So therapeutic presence means a way of being with the client that optimizes the doing of therapy, being present to what's going on within oneself as well as within the client. The only way we can do that is if we are regulated in ourselves. Our body is our instrument. We can't accurately attune to our client if we are dysregulated. This is a time that I've seen in many of the therapists that I do work with and that I do consulting with, they are dysregulated. The things affecting their clients are also affecting them. The world is a little kooky and they are coming dysregulated and unintentionally bringing dysregulation to their clients. So we need to be really careful. The other missed opportunity is when we are not affected by the same things as our clients and maybe missing how our trans clients are showing up in our spaces because we don't realize how dysregulating something was for them, something they saw on social media, something they saw on the news. We really need to be attuned to what's going on in their worlds. And if we are not attuned to their bodies and faces and movements, we are not going to be able to catch the pain, but we also aren't going to be able to catch the joy. So we're listening for moments of affirmation that we can grab onto, that we can connect to, that we can celebrate, that we can amplify, right? That we can really amplify. So for Chloe, part of what we're doing, right? I said she tunes into the negative more than the positive. We really work on amplifying the positive. So when I hear that, I really am attuned to it. And she was telling me a story about a beat playing in her band at school and just how amazing it felt to be sort of her authentic self and connecting with music in front of her peers and not wanting to hide, but wanting to be celebrated. We really tuned into this and I could see it. I could see the joy in her face, in her body, in her voice. We really sort of connected to it and we celebrated it. Then I'll think about sort of the idea of these corrective emotional experiences. So we're amplifying the joy and we're having corrective emotional experiences. We are cultivating affirming experiences that our clients may have never experienced before, or that they are really not getting to experience with adults. Maybe they're only experiencing with a friend or an online friend, but the grown-ups in their lives aren't there for them, or only one is. We are really doing this because this is a way that we buffer gender minority stress. This is the way we buffer some of the contextual factors that are bringing our clients a sense of hopelessness and lack of sense of belonging or lack of worthiness, right? So we're engaging trans and gender expansive clients through our unequivocally positive lens. This unequivocally positive lens towards gender diversity may be new to them. It may be something that they see in others but can't yet see for themselves. So we are holding that. We are offering that. We are embodying that in our clinical spaces. We are meeting stories of dysphoria with validation and compassion, right? We are meeting stories of discrimination and rejection with validation, compassion, right? Empathy. We are creating a space where clients feel permission, maybe for the first time, to make decisions about people, places, and things that support them or that don't support them. And we are really celebrating exploring explorations, be curiosity, right? We are not stifling. We're exploring and recognizing and celebrating, inviting exploration, right? Because I think a lot of times what happens is maybe parents or loved ones are not explicitly rejecting, but they are stifling. They are secretly wishing for the transness to go away. Young people know that. Children know that. Teenagers know that. Adults know that. We feel that. We're perceptive beings. We have interoception. We can pick up on all of that. In our spaces, we are not stifling. We are not hoping transness goes away. We know transness is perfectly beautiful and wonderful, right? Trans and gender diverse identities are amazing. Some of the loveliest people in my whole wide life, right? And so, as we think about that, we really believe this and we are offering this perspective to our clients in case they don't have it or when they do have it but have lost it for a moment. We are celebrating explorations in really neat ways. So, with Chloe, one of the things she had to do was actually by permission, I mean, we are helping clients sort of trust their own needs, validate their own needs, recognize that it's okay to have needs. And if they need, and she needed, to set a boundary on some really painful adult siblings, some siblings that were hurting her via text and maybe intentionally, maybe unintentionally, but it was really, really bad and it was not stopping and no one was protecting her. So she needed to create some space and distance. And so she needed to do some blocking. She needed to do some creating space in the way that she could. And there's not always going to be support for that for any of us in decisions we have to make. So helping our clients, and it may be the first time that they're given permission to take care of their own needs rather than the needs of all the people in their lives. Trans and gender expansive folks, like LGBTQ folks, honestly, more broadly, are often raised up to believe that it is their job to apologize to others for their identities, to protect others from their identities. And they grow up with this sense of my needs are not okay, my needs don't matter. Other people's needs must always come before mine. So that is part of the trauma work here, is undoing that. And then we are also, some of the work that I did with Chloe was around amplifying, celebrating, being curious about some of the connections at school that really brought her affirmation. So she was able to think about and tune into the feelings and the thoughts she had at school with some of the affirming friends and really spend time celebrating it, talking about it, giggling about it, just feeling really, really good about those things, amplifying those things, and having that be celebrated rather than sort of minimized. Or, oh, are you sure you want to hang out with those friends? Or what about your old friends? Or, oh, do all your friends dress that way? Right. So some of the things that didn't always feel good or don't always feel good to our trans and gender expansive kids for obvious reasons, we are making sure that our sessions are different. Hold on, I feel like I skipped something. Oh, I just skipped a quick slide. So we're going to then move into thinking about some of the other ways to build hope and resilience through very specific strategies. And some of these strategies show up in my Affirm interventions, and some of them show up in other kinds of interventions, things we can do in EMDR, build into DBT, build into a range of other interventions. Strengthening emotional regulation using psychological flexibility and neuroplasticity. Okay. So we have this fabulous capacity to help our clients change their neural networks by tuning into the positive, focusing on the positive, and letting go of or spending less time on the negative. So we are going to help our clients notice the coping strategies that maybe were really helpful at one point, but that maybe aren't so helpful now, help them notice how they may be leading to negative emotions or reactions now. So, social media, listen, we all use it in various ways, shapes, or forms. Our clients do, and a lot of it can be really helpful. Social media and online presence can be so helpful for trans and gender expansive folks. A lot of connections to be made out there. What Chloe found that she was doing for the last few months has been doom scrolling, like seriously doom scrolling. And she used that word to describe it to me. She was like, yeah, what do I do about this? Like, this is like not helping. And we talked about why she was doing it. And she was sort of like, because I feel like it's my job to be informed. So many things are happening to me. How can I not be aware? And so we talked about sort of the difference between being aware of and sort of going down the rabbit hole of social media or news or whatever it would be, threads. And she was like, yeah, I get that. And so she talked about, algorithms. And then she really talked about sort of thinking about reconnecting with some of the online spaces that really bring her up, that uplift her, that make her feel good about herself, and really sort of making sure she was spending much more time on those. So she really wanted to limit it and say, like, I don't want to limit my time on my phone, period, but I really want to limit my doom scrolling to a bit of awareness and then move into things that inspire me, sort of other trans people, music. She really likes nature. She likes exploring things that make her laugh, sort of tongue-in-cheek humor. So that was her work. She also, we also talked about strategies for being able to be with your emotions, painful feelings, without sort of dissociating or avoiding, and also without being overwhelmed, right? Hijacked. And so for Chloe, her tendency is to dissociate or depersonalize rather than become really hyper aroused. And for her, the work is on noticing, naming, and feeling different feelings within session, where it's safe, where she can feel it, realize she's not sort of losing herself, connect to it, and then that helps her stay present with her feelings for the rest of the day. And then fostering more positive neural connections, really with this focus on affirmation. So tuning into aspects of life that bring joy, hope, and love, and really tuning into those as much as I can to sort of remind myself that even during tough times, and this was the hard part for Chloe. Yes, Chloe, things are no doubt. Not going to debate you that things aren't going well right now in certain areas of the world. Things were really upsetting her, some of the things she was seeing online and the news and some of the changes that have happened really upsetting to Chloe. That's true. And other things can be simultaneously true. And for her, that was really important because she was seeing like it does not serve me to just think about all the negatives. Though I can know those things are true and still tune it's not a betrayal of the trans community for me to know these things are true but also know that I am feeling a lot of hope and love and joy with my girlfriend and my music and beach walks with my mom. We're in South Florida, so beach walks are a thing. And then using imagery is huge and powerful. Imagery builds positive neural pathways, and this is work that I got from Laurel Parnell, who does attachment focused EMDR work. And I love her work. And I really use it to bring and foster affirmative resources for my clients. So this means using imagery to really strengthen supports. They can be, if a client has none in the real world other than you, it's okay. Imagination can be role models, people online, superheroes, all of that. It's amazing. I've done Star Trek, the whole shebang with folks. Lots of powerful people in the mind's eye. Frida Kahlo is mine. So my client Chloe wanted to do her mother, who's a nurturer, and her girlfriend, who's strength and protection. You have your client breathe and ground, connect inward, visualize that affirming source of compassion and strength, and really tune in to that person and that relationship and what it gives the client. So the client is imagining and connecting with the words that make her feel affirmed. Chloe connects with the facial expressions of her mother and her girlfriend when they are looking at her with compassion or nurturing or love or strength. She tunes into this felt sense for her, which is either being really protected or being really powerful and strong and like, I've got this. She's able to then label her emotions. A lot of times we strengthen this by drawing, journaling, art, sometimes tapping in. I do some tapping if you're a EFT or EMDR person, symbolizing this. And then she can look back. The artwork can be posted around the room. It's really powerful. The next piece is really thinking about how we can highlight and strengthen experiences of gender affirmation and euphoria and self-acceptance through identity affirming sort of work. We do this in our Affirm intervention. This is our website where you can look at a bunch of stuff that we have through Affirm. We were featured, I would say, in SAMHSA's suicide prevention strategies for underserved youth. We were the LGBT intervention that was featured. It was posted on SAMHSA. I think now you have to maybe email us to get it. I can share the resource. Excuse me. And through Affirm, sorry. Through Affirm, we really work on strengthening hope through an affirmative hope box activity. This is an activity that's actually a suicide prevention activity, which is why we integrated it into Affirm. Came from various folks who did a lot of this work with adults, and we adapted the Hope Box work and brought it into the LGBT specific realm and trans specific realm, where folks create a Hope Box that they can use to foster their own growth and hope when they need it the most. Here are some examples of the kinds of things that one would put in an affirming hope box for an LGBT or trans folks. A lot of clients put things in that give them hope for the future. When I go to college, when I leave this town, when I move, you all are in a great place. When I move to New York, that's what many of my clients say. When I move to Cali, when I move to New York, transition plans, their first, their pride group flyer, flags, etc., stuffed animals, heroes. Chloe created a affirmative hope box with me to really deal with things that come up in her life when she needs it most, when family members are coming at her or when she gets misgendered at work. It can really derail her sometimes. She will slump backwards. Her goal was to remind her she is worthy of a future where she can live authentically, happily, and successfully, and that she has everything it takes to create that future for herself. She put in symbols of her girlfriend, her mom, her cats, her dog, symbols of Oregon and Canada, her places, playing music, financial independence, all of that stuff. Her values, she's really sort of pro-trans, pro-affirmation, pro-anti-racist work. Another piece, and these things are actually beautiful statements that can go in a hope box and be posted around one's room, are self-compassion statements. And these mean self-compassion means the ability to be kind to myself when I'm struggling, when it's hard. And they have 3 dimensions: self-kindness, common humanity, comes from the work of Kristen Neff. She's amazing. She has an amazing website with a lot of evidence and a lot of practices for self-compassion work for lots of different client populations. When applying this to the affirmative, through the affirmative lens, we really think about how important it is to give yourself self-compassion and self-kindness when the world may not be, or maybe your own parents who should be aren't. And so we teach our clients these skills and reinforce the importance of being kind to oneself. So gentle self-compassion involves being accepting, soothing, and reassuring to ourselves. This is one of the interventions that's in our Affirm program, both our Affirm Adult, Affirm Youth, and our Affirm Caregiver. Self-kindness, these are Chloe's statements. I know my life has meaning and purpose, even if others tell me different, or even when others tell me different. I am a special person with unique perspectives and so much strength. She always forgets how amazingly strong she is. And I try to remind her, and then we do these things to remind her, and I see her glow when she remembers. Common humanity, this idea of not being alone. There have been queer and trans people throughout history and across cultures, right? There have been struggles in the past. There are now. We will make it. We will survive. I am part of the queer community. She says that to herself when sometimes she feels like she doesn't have enough time in. So she doubts her voice in the trans community or the queer community. She reminds herself. And then mindfulness, this idea of, I feel hopeless, but I have been here before and I know this feeling's not forever. So she uses that to remind herself that she's been down, way more down, and she is able to get past it. Fierce compassion is a little bit more of a back talk, right? It's this idea of being able to say, like, I can be fierce in my compassion to myself. I can be tough. So self-kindness statements for her here are, it's okay to be angry. I deserve to be protected. I am strong. I can do this. By standing up for myself, I'm standing up for other trans people. So it reminds her, like, yes, like, you get to stand up. You're protecting others who need you. And mindfulness, this is not okay and it hurts. It is not okay. It hurts me when they say that, when they text me like that. Or these are not my truths. I don't have to believe these and I won't. So that's the idea of self-compassion in play. So our big takeaways here. Affirmative trauma responsive therapy has the potential to help mitigate gender minority stress that is linked with the suicidality that we all absolutely want to prevent. Clinicians should and can and need to and will support and create gender affirming experiences within their relationships with their clients. They need to tune into the potentially traumatic impact of anti-trans social contexts, especially now. help their clients be mindful of the time they spend on non-affirming and affirming thoughts and experiences, or with affirming and non-affirming people, places, and things. Really practice noticing and celebrating identity affirming experiences, big and small, with your clients, in session, out of session, moments for joy via text, all kinds of celebrations. And for you all, really continue to build your skills to be in a trans affirming provider. I think you're going to need them more than ever. And I will pop through lots of references. They're all welcome. And then there's a resource slide that has a bunch of stuff. This is my website, other great websites, one of the centers that I'm connected with, other centers that I'm not connected with that are amazing. That's up there. And then I think that maybe this is facilitated by Diana, the Q&A piece.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Austin. For those of you that are joining and seeing the webinar live, obviously there are a lot of hearts and claps along the way for such a great presentation, and certainly timely. So thank you. So just a reminder for folks, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them into the chat box at this point. We do have a few minutes for a few questions that came in, so I'm going to turn to those now. We had some along the lines of a focus on the intersectionality of marginalized identities. So, two questions that came in. Can you share some examples of bringing in culturally responsive care to LGBTQ youth of color? I know you really specified bringing in that sort of trauma responsive care with the affirming care. So anything along the lines of culturally responsive care for youth of color. And then another question too, on the intersection of autism with transgender expansion and gender dysphoria, right? So bringing in other IDDs. So yeah, wonder if you can just speak to that.
So I'll do the autism question first. So many of my clients are autistic as well as trans, and so this is the work that I do with all of them. We, we all do this work. It looks different for everybody. I think for those of us who are providers, I think that I think this is true for all of our trans clients, making sure we don't have assumptions about what affirming needs are. I think they vary widely across clients, and this may be particularly true for trans clients who are also autistic. So making sure that we allow our clients to define what affirming means to them. We allow clients to identify the kinds of social affirmation they need, really tuning into this individualized client approach. I think that thinking about these things is really important. I think, and in some ways I will say, tuning into the whole person in the room, whether the client is autistic and trans or a person of color and trans, that we must do our work with all of our clients to sort of bring all of their identities into the room. For some clients, sort of thinking about, as we are, and we say this in all of our trainings, honestly, when Dr. Craig and I do trainings together, as we are doing this work, we really want to honor the whole person and really get a sense of what's meaningful to them. So if we never refer clients to resources that don't make sense for them. We're always attuned to, does this make sense for my client based on all of their identities? We explore and make offerings. We talk with clients of what does it mean to be affirmed in your, sort of, in this case, in your religious space. So this idea of being, and there is a lot of data for clients who hold on to their religious identities, growing data that being affirmed in a trans affirming church is like the end all be all. It feels so amazing. And so the same thing for clients who maybe are Black or Latinx, finding spaces or opportunities to affirm multiple identities. So if they are putting things in their hope box, making sure that the role models help affirm more than one of their identities. As you are thinking about the needs of your client, are you bringing into the space experiences that are relevant to both their queer identity and their trans identity and their Black identity? And so I think it's really important, and sort of, and I always say we are the conduit, so it is your due diligence to really tune in to all of the culturally relevant factors of any given client. Otherwise, you are leaving a really important part of them outside of the door.
Right. Great. Thank you so much. Let's see, a question that came in around interventions. Are there any weaknesses or limitations of the affirming model?
Like affirmative practice in general.
I'm thinking maybe in response to the intervention that you developed.
Our affirm intervention, I mean, I don't know, it's evident. So I'll speak in two things just in case I answer both questions. So our Affirm intervention has been implemented far and wide in the US, North America, and we do trainings for people. We have a manual that is actually in Dutch, as well as one that's being translated into Hungarian, used in lots of different places across the globe, has a lot of efficacy, really easy to implement. It's 8 sessions. The hardest thing is that we find the biggest challenge to implementing affirmative interventions are agencies that are not on board. When you are working in an agency where you don't have infrastructure to support LGBT young people, that is the challenge, is getting an agency to move to implement something new and to be committed to being affirming. So that's the affirm intervention. Affirmative practice more broadly, there are absolutely no limitations to being affirming. It is best practice. There's a beautiful book. I don't think I put it on the slide, but it's Diane Arensaf, The Gender Creative Child. And she's amazing. She's been doing this work for years. If you have any worries about affirming a child, all of the data tells us that when you affirm a child, even if later on their identity ebbs and flows in a new direction, if you affirm them in the here and now, it is better for their health and well-being. They feel attuned to, connected, supported, and safe, both within their therapeutic setting and or their parents. The affirmative, the gender creative child by Aaron Saft explains that really well for little kiddos all the way up through adolescence. She's been doing this forever. She talks about all of that. I suggest you offer that to parents and or read it if that's something that any of you are questioning. Affirmative practice is best practice. That's the science is there. The science is truly there.
Great, thank you. And let's see, your thoughts around when you have maybe a child who doesn't want to disclose to other family members that their sort of gender preference or gender identity. Any thoughts that you can share around that?
It's really common, right? So children are trying to keep themselves safe, and that is really understandable because many times extended family and or other folks are not safe. So part of controlling the process of sharing identities and who, when, how all that happens really should be placed in the hands of the child. And parents should facilitate that journey as much as possible, but not lead it. It's a client-driven process, whether the kid is 5, 15, or 35. So that is a really natural and part of self-protection. And it's part of feeling like I have control over my own life, which is so important, as many trans and gender diverse kids don't. And it can be hard for parents. And so if you're working with the parent, helping them to understand the child's needs, to normalize that need, and helping parents have open conversations about this, and helping parents facilitate those conversations of coming out to family members when needed, but also protecting the youth when they want to stay quiet about it for the time being.
Great. Thank you so much. And I do just want to highlight that. So thank you, Leslie. Put in the title of the book, The Gender Creative Child, Pathways for Nurturing and Supporting Children Who Live Outside Gender Boxes by Diane. So thank you so much. Okay, so we just have a few minutes left. We do have the link in the chat box for the survey. Let's see if we can squeeze in one or two more questions, Dr. Austin. How might you support, and you might have spoken a little bit about this, but more specifically, how might you support a trans youth or overall LGBTQ youth with internalized stigma?
Yeah, so I think you're probably not going to find many youth who have none, because we live in a world that is sort of the stigma, the bias is just coming. So the way you would support that is you would help them normalize that they might be experiencing that, help them understand maybe where that came from, help them explore minority stress, some of these early messages. We actually have lots of sessions on this in Affirm, but you can do this in other conversational ways, and then help them begin to explore other sort of affirming experiences, begin to invite them to consider other ways of looking at it, consider other ways. Sometimes it's easier to say, well, I don't think that this person deserves to be discriminated against, so another trans kid, but I feel like I shouldn't be. So it's often easier to be a cheerleader for someone else. You can often help them say, what would a friend say to you? What would a loved one? How do you think your best friend would respond to that negative thought? So there's a lot of that work. The self-compassion activities can be really helpful, because it's sometimes harder to be compassionate to ourselves than it is to others. So we can help them learn how to talk nicely and think nicely about themselves by channeling the voice of someone else who does love or care about them. Maybe that's you, maybe that's a friend, maybe that's a partner.
Great. And just this very last question, we're literally down to the minute, but anything that you can say to maybe support a parent who is maybe not understanding or accepting of their child at a particular moment in time?
So that is not a 1 second conversation, but
True.
I would say it's a really big question. The most important thing parents, like, if I could distill it in, is your parents, your kid needs you to be supportive. They deserve you to be supportive. Even if you don't understand it all or don't get it, your parent, your child needs you to be affirmative even before you fully understand it. Your child needs you to love them unconditionally, exactly the way they are, even if you don't yet understand everything. It's a really huge ask. We spend 7 sessions on it at Affirm Caregiver, but it is a really big and important ask. And that if you can ask them, beg them to give it a try, that's important.
No, I appreciate it. And I know you mentioned obviously this webinar is really focused on trans youth, but for folks, there's the survey that went out. If you want to hear more about this topic, primarily around supporting caregivers with LGBTQIA plus youth, please put that into the feedback form. I do want to highlight that we do have some upcoming events in March. So one focused on homelessness, another one also on youth peer advocates. And then as we do close out, I want to say a big thank you to Dr. Austin for bringing your clinical expertise and your research to our audience today. Another big thank you to our audience members. We do understand that you are taking time out of your workday. So again, thank you so much for joining us. As a reminder, the slides and the recording will be up on our website, ctechny.org, within the next 2 to 3 business days. Certainly invite you to also visit our website for any past trainings and upcoming events. Any questions or concerns, please reach out to us at ctech.info@ny.edu. And with all the thank yous coming in, Dr. Austin, again, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining us, and have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you. Thank you, Diana.